That isn't the way we should be doing business, and that's why this very simple proposal, no senator may object on behalf of another senator without disclosing the name of the senator. You own the hold. Senator Merkley.
And I want to note that as you observed, Senator Wyden and Senator Grassley and Senator McCaskill have worked hard on a much more detailed version than we have in Senate Resolution 10, but the basic notion is the same. If you're going to place a hold, you're going to do so in a public and accountable fashion, and that would greatly improve the quality of dialogue. I've been in the position of trying to get help for the Klamath Basin in Oregon because they had the worst drought they've had since they started recording rainfall, and it took me quite a lengthy period to find out. I eventually did find out, but it took me quite a long period of asking a lot of questions before I found out who had the hold so I could even go and ask them to release the holds so we would have a chance of moving that assistance for this drought-impacted portion of my state. But with this change, senators holding up assistance to Klamath or any other provision would have to come to the floor and make clear where they stand.
And Senator Merkley, what ends up happening is then it's transparent. Then if you, as a senator from Oregon on the Klamath Basin, want to do something, you can go to that senator, whoever it is, and say, I've got an issue here for my state. Can we work together to try to work this out? But right now, the problem we have is that some senator is putting on a secret hold, and we don't know who it is, and we don't have the ability to clear that away. And so this is a good, solid proposal.
So it's not only secret to the public, it's often secret to fellow senators, greatly complicating our effort to dialogue with fellow senators and to explain why we're pushing something or pursuing something and get their partnership in it.
That's right. That's right. And now I'm going to move on to the third section of Senate Res 10, which is the right to offer amendments. And as Senator Merkley knows very well, and our presiding officer, one of the big issues around here, and this is getting into a little bit into the weeds, but one of the big issues that it could help us function better is if we just agreed that whether we're in the majority or in the minority, we want both sides to have the opportunity to debate and to offer amendments. And so we are trying to protect that right. Many of us are thinking in terms of these rules. We're saying we want them to be fair to both sides. And so the provision on right to offer amendments is in the legislation. It talks about them being majority and minority amendments. It doesn't talk about parties, because we may well, a lot of the pundits are saying that we're going to be in the minority in 2 years. And I think it's only fair in the United States Senate that we have that kind of relationship. Senator Merkley.
Well, I'd like to note that this is important to both the majority and the minority. For example, we recently had a bill on the floor of the Senate which was a major bill regarding the compromise struck by President Obama with our Republican colleagues to spend almost $1 trillion. I had an amendment that I wanted to present here that would have taken some of the money in that bill that was being spent in a fashion which created very few jobs and spent it in a fashion that would create a lot of jobs. And I had another proposal to take money that wasn't being put to good use and proceed to fill in and support the solvency of Social Security and Medicare. Now, people can argue about whether these were good ideas or not, but if I'd been able to offer one or both of those amendments, I think it would improve the debate and dialogue here and perhaps have resulted in a better piece of legislation.
Senator Merkley, the fourth provision, and I think you're very right on Section 3, but the Section 4 is the issue of extended debate, and I would like to have you talk about that issue, because that's the issue that you've worked the most closely on. You have raised the issue of what we have going right now is what we call silent debate. It's a silent filibuster. We have people that say they want to filibuster and object, but then they go home or they go on vacation or something like that. And so you have drafted a provision. You were the architect of this provision in SRES 10. And could you go through that and just talk about this section on extended debate, what it does, and why it's important to what we're dealing with here today?
You bet. This provision about a talking filibuster says rather than having a situation where a senator objects to a majority vote and then we delay the work of the Senate for a week, but nobody is here explaining their position to the American public, instead we would switch to a provision that says if 41 senators want continued debate on a bill, we will get continued debate on a bill. We will have debate on a bill, not silent. Currently, we have the hidden or the silent filibuster. We would create the public or the talking filibuster. And to give you the sense of numbers on this, these blue bars represent filibusters during the last 2-year period. During the first 6 months, 33, 34 in the second 6 months, 36 in the third 6 months, and then 33. I think that's 136 total filibusters in a 2-year period. This is why we didn't have any appropriation bills. This is why we didn't have a budget. This is why we didn't deal with hundreds of House bills. This is why we didn't get nominations done and advise and consent on them. Now, is this the way the Senate has always operated? Absolutely not. In the last few decades, there's been a huge change in how the Senate has functioned. So let's take a look. This is average per year. In the 1900 to 1970 period, the average was 1 filibuster per year, right here. In the 1970s, the average was 16 filibusters per year. In the 1980s, 21 filibusters per year, average. 1990s, 36 filibusters per year, average. 2000, 2010, 48 filibusters per year. And in 2009, 2010, this last session, average of 68, or 136 total. So you can see from this chart the growing dysfunction, because there was a social contract that existed in which you as an individual senator didn't exercise your power to object to a simple majority vote unless you thought it was an issue of huge consequence. And maybe you do that once or twice in a career, not routinely, week after week. But that social contract has been eliminated, so the filibuster, which was really the honoring of every senator to be heard, that we weren't going to hold a vote until every senator had had their say, so we could be fully informed, have a full dialogue. It is that reciprocal respect that is being routinely disrespected and abused on the floor of the U.S. Senate. Now, in our heads, many of us have an image of the filibuster that comes from Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. And here's Jimmy Stewart playing the character of Jefferson Smith, and he comes to defend a corrupt action and stop it regarding a camp for children. And he talks through the night, and there's many forces assaulting him. But Jimmy Stewart is going to stay on the Senate floor, and he's going to tell the American people what he's fighting for and why. And this is the talking filibuster, that you don't object and go away and leave the Senate suspended. You don't vote for additional debate and then not have that debate. You come to this floor, and you hold the floor, and you join with other partners to hold the floor in order to explain why you are holding up the Senate and to carry on the debate, to have that additional debate that you have voted for. So the talking filibuster is almost that simple. Replaces the silent filibuster with the talking filibuster. The result is 2 critical things. First of all, transparency and accountability with the American public. The public can see what you're saying on the floor of the Senate and can say you're a hero or you're a bum. They can agree with you, they can disagree, but it's visible, not hidden. The second thing is that each senator has to expend time and energy to carry on a filibuster. So this will strip away all of these frivolous filibusters that are done for no other reason than to prevent the Senate from being able to carry on its responsibilities.
Senator Merkley, let me also say one thing about the talking filibuster that hit me, and that's the bipartisanship. As we know, both of us, I think, were here on the floor when Senator Arlen Specter gave his farewell address. I believe the presiding officer was also here. And Senator Specter served in the minority for 2 years and then was in the majority for almost 2 years. And both times he came forward with a proposal he was calling the same thing, talking filibuster, whether he was on the minority side or majority side. So I think, once again, I just want to demonstrate that each of these provisions in here has bipartisan support. And I believe this debate, we don't think this debate is about partisanship. We don't think it's about power grabs. We don't think it's about those kinds of things. It's about, as you have elucidated, it's about making the Senate work better. It's about, and when we say the Senate work better, we're talking work better for the American people. I think if we did the oversight of government when it comes to appropriations bills, a budget, getting a budget out on time, getting appropriations bills done on time, that does a lot to make sure the public's money is well spent. And that's something I hear about a lot back home. But with regard to a power grab, I had a statement that I wanted to put in the record that shows very dramatically why the constitutional option is not a power grab. And I would ask unanimous consent to put that statement in the record at this point, and also a Republican Policy Committee paper that's titled "The Constitutional Option, the Senate's Power to Make Procedural Rules by a Majority Vote." It's dated April 25th, 2005. I'd ask unanimous consent to put both of those in the record, because I think they show that this isn't about a power grab. This is about us trying to work to make sure that the Senate is going to work better for the American people.
Without objection.
And I would also ask unanimous consent for my law clerk, Tim Woodbury, to have floor privileges for the duration of this debate.
Without objection.
Now, the fifth provision of Senate Res 10, and as Senator Merkley knows, we are down here today to try to get Senate Res 10 rules changes onto the floor, and we're going to be asking unanimous consent. But the fifth provision is called post-cloture debate on nominations. And what are we talking about there? Well, when we have a nomination that comes onto the floor, a judicial nomination, an executive nomination, those kinds of nominations have in the rule 30 hours of post-cloture debate. So when you decide to cut off debate, when you get to the point and say we're going to cut off debate, that 30 hours is normally used for amendments and to work through the amendment process. Well, when you have a nomination, you're not amending a nomination. You're trying to either move forward, up or down vote on the nomination. The person's either voted up or down. And so it makes no sense to have 30 hours. And so the other common sense proposal we have in here is to shorten that cloture time to 2 hours, the post-cloture time to 2 hours from 30 hours, because there's no reason to amend in that phase. And I don't know, Senator Merkley, you're also familiar with this provision also, I think.
Well, I think what you've set forward is we would save 28 hours on each nomination. And if the Senate goes around the clock, that's a bit more than a day. If we're doing a day, 10-hour days, then that's almost 3 days. We save 3 days of Senate time that really is put to no purpose right now, since at the time that you have 60-vote cloture, you've already got 60 members saying they're ready to vote. Let's go forward. And so letting people just wrap up over a couple hours, restate their key points for other members makes sense. That's why the 2 hours are there. But rather 2 hours and 3 days.
Oh, That's correct. So what we're doing here today, and Senator Merkley, I know you've introduced a freestanding proposal on the talking filibuster. We have joined together, and I've also signed on to that. We have Senate Res 10, which was filed on January the 5th, that has these 5 solid provisions for reforming the rules. And I think if you look at these in history, they've had broad bipartisan support. I would at this point recognize that our colleague in this rules debate and our partner and hard worker and more senior and experienced on these rules matters has joined us, Senator Tom Harkin from Iowa. And we're in a colloquy situation, and so I would
Senator,
yield the floor.
For an observation?
You bet.
Madam President?
Senator from Iowa.
Madam President, first of all, I want to thank my friends, my colleagues, Senator Udall and Senator Merkley, for their great leadership on this issue. They have brought a breath of fresh air to the Senate in exposing, I think, what has become a gridlock, which has made the Senate almost dysfunctional. And so my friends, Senator Udall especially, in focusing on what the Constitution really says and doesn't say, and the fact that I believe, and I'm just always speaking for myself, I believe that we are not, Madam President, living up to the oath that we stood down here by the well and took when we were sworn into the United States Senate. We took an oath that we would uphold and defend the Constitution and that we would bear true faith and allegiance to the same. Well, quite frankly, the Constitution, I believe, is quite clear in the way it's written, in the verbiage that's used, and if we look to what the founders wanted in the Constitution, it was very clear that but for a few instances, which they clearly spelled out in the Constitution, requiring a supermajority of votes, like treaties, for example, and impeachments and expelling a member, that the Constitution is quite clear that everything else is a majority vote. But the Senate has adopted rules in the past that I believe are, quite frankly, bordering on unconstitutional, by requiring that in order to change the rules, it requires two-thirds vote, 67 votes. Well, that might be okay for one Congress if they wanted to adopt that kind of a rule. But how can one Congress bind another? I think it's quite clear from, but how can one Congress bind another? I think it's quite clear from parliaments of old and other legislative bodies and court rulings in this country that one legislative body cannot burden a subsequent legislative body. And yet here in the Senate, because of a change in the rules that happened some years ago, they say it binds every Senate thereafter. I believe that's unconstitutional. And my friend from New Mexico, Senator Udall, has pointed this out time and time again, that really we have not only a constitutional right, but a constitutional obligation that on the first convening day of the United States Senate of any Congress, that we adopt rules. And we can adopt those rules by majority vote. Now, if the majority wants to adopt a rule that says that for this Congress we have to abide by a certain number, well, that's okay, but it cannot bind another Congress. It cannot bind another Congress. So Senator Udall has been quite eloquent on this issue, and he has been very forthright and has fought very hard for what is known as the constitutional option. That's just a fancy word for saying live up to the Constitution. What we took an oath to, bear true faith and allegiance to, the same, the Constitution. Senator Udall is constantly reminding us of what that Constitution says and doesn't say, and that we have the right of every, and because the Constitution also says, as the Senator has pointed out many times, the Constitution says that each body shall adopt its rules. so the Senate can adopt its rules. And since it does not say in the Constitution that each body can adopt its rules, but it requires a two-thirds vote to change those rules, it doesn't say that. It just says each body can adopt the rules. And it does not specify that we have to have a supermajority to do so. It only specifies a supermajority, I think, if I'm not mistaken, in 5 cases. 5 cases. So obviously the framers of the Constitution were quite clear that each Congress could adopt its rules, and they can adopt them by a majority vote. Now we have a situation in the Senate whereby we are throttled by rules that do not permit us to change those rules except by a two-thirds vote. As I've said many times, what if the voters of this country decided to elect 90 senators from the same party, say the Republican Party? Well, could they come in and say, okay, we're going to adopt new rules, and from henceforth, it's going to take 90 votes to change those rules, knowing that that may never happen again in the history of this country, that we'd ever have 90 senators from one party. Could they do that? Well, if you accept the logic of what we're working with right now, the answer is yes, they could do that and bind every Senate from then on in perpetuity that the only way they could change the rules would be with 90 votes. Well, you say that wouldn't happen. Well, what about 67 votes or 75 votes or 78 votes? What's so magic about 67? Where's that magic number come from? It was plucked out of thin air. Now, so that's why I address myself to the issue that Senator Udall has worked so hard on, and that is focusing on the constitutional issue. Senator Merkley, my friend from Oregon, is focused on Rule 22, which provides for, it's called the filibuster rule. And basically, under Rule 22, we don't even have to filibuster. I mean, a filibuster, people think that they come on the Senate floor like Mr. Smith goes to Washington and they speak and they hold the floor. And they can hold the floor until they drop, or if somebody else wants to speak, they can speak. That's what people imagine a filibuster to be. And that's what a filibuster used to be. But what a filibuster has become, is a means whereby the minority can stop us from debating anything. So what has happened to the Senate, supposedly the greatest deliberative body in the world, we have now become the greatest non-deliberative body because we don't debate, because now a minority can decide what we take up and what we don't take up. Think about it this way, Mr. President. Under the Rule 22, as it's now being used, 41 senators can decide what this body does. They have the veto right over anything we bring up that the majority wants to bring up. And again, when I say majority, Mr. President, I'm not saying Democrats and Republicans. I'm saying any majority. That's why I first brought up my proposal in 1995 when we were in the minority. Because I wanted to make it clear that this was not a means whereby we were trying to grab power or anything. I said, no, this is for the smooth functioning of this place. I predicted at that time in 1995, and the record is clear, it's in the record, I predicted that unless we do something, the number of filibusters would escalate. It would be an arms race. And that's exactly what's happened. 135 last year, 135. So the senator from Oregon has said that if we're going to have a filibuster, at least people ought to come on the floor and talk. At least, if you're going to filibuster, if you're so opposed to a bill and you've got a group that are opposed to it, at least stand out here and speak. We don't have to do that now. They just put in quorum calls and walk off the floor. And a minority, 41 senators, decide what we take up. Stop anything. Think about it this way. For a bill to become law, in this country, it requires it to pass the House and the Senate in the same form, and the President has to sign it. Right now, the way that we are constituted and the way we operate in the Senate, 41, a minority in the Senate, regardless of what the House wants to do, regardless of what the President wants to do, and regardless of what the voters may want, can stop it. That turns the whole concept of democracy on its head. I thought the majority rules with rights to protect the minority, so that the minority can offer amendments. I don't even mind if the minority wants to slow things down. That should be their right to be able to do that as a minority. They should have the right to offer amendments, to change a bill as they see fit. But I do not believe a minority ought to have the right to absolutely stop and veto a bill from coming to the Senate floor or an amendment. So we have a situation where the power resides with the minority. Now, I heard distinguished senator from Kentucky, Senator McConnell, the other day got up and said this is a power grab by the Democrats. A power grab. No, no, no. The power grab is by the minority, whatever minority. The power grab is by the minority to insist that they have the right to veto anything here. That's the power grab. And so now the power lies with the minority, but the responsibility lies with the majority. So the majority in the Senate has the responsibility to act. We don't have the authority. The minority has the authority, the right to veto things, but they don't have the responsibility. And that's why we have such a dysfunctional system. This is what the people of America are opposed to. I'll have more to say about this tomorrow, as I think we get into a longer debate on this. But I think the people have the right to understand that if a majority of the House and a majority of the Senate pass something and the President agrees, it ought to become law. That's not the way it is. We used to have a system on the Senate floor where if you offered an amendment and if you got 51 votes, you passed the amendment. Can't do that anymore. You cannot get an amendment offered on the Senate floor unless you've got 60 votes. That's what's happened over the last 4 or 5 years. I know. I myself tried to get an amendment offered on the financial regulation bill. I thought I had over 51 votes for it. I don't know if I did or not, but I was not able to offer it because there was a 60-vote threshold. I might have had 52 or 53 or 54 or 55, but I didn't have 60. So now, in the Senate, we require a supermajority to do anything because 41 senators, a minority, has the right to veto anything the majority wants to bring up. Well, Mr. President, as I said, I'll have more to say about this, but it seems to me this stands democracy on its head and the idea of majority rule on its head. I think the majority ought to have the right. I mean, elections ought to have consequences. If people vote for a certain party to be in power, that party, regardless of what it is, ought to have the authority to act. Now, there ought to be rights for the minority to amend, discuss, debate, slow things down, fine. But the minority should not have the absolute power of a veto, and that's what the minority has in the United States Senate today. So that's the issue that Senator Murphy has been going after, and that is if you're going to, at least if you're going to have a filibuster, there ought to be some consequences to it. And the consequences are you ought to be here and talk and not hide behind quorum calls where we sit here for days on end doing nothing, because someone's objected to bringing up a bill, but they don't have to be here to discuss it. And so, Mr. President, I just want to thank my two colleagues for their great leadership on this. As I said, they brought a breath of fresh air here. And to the average person out there watching, they probably think, well, bring it up for a vote. Well, things aren't quite that simple in the United States Senate, as we're about to find out. And so we're going to do whatever we can to bring this to the forefront. But I dare say the way the game is rigged right now, the way that I would say, maybe I strike those words. The game is not. The way the rules are set up right now, requiring a supermajority to change those rules, makes it nearly impossible for a majority of the United States Senate to act. So again, I thank my colleagues, Senator Merkley and Senator Udall, for their leadership on this. I look forward to being in league with them to do whatever we can to make this place function a little bit better and a little bit more in accordance with the principles of democracy and majority rule and respecting the rights and the wishes of the voters of this country. So again, I thank my colleague from Oregon for his leadership. I see he's standing there, and I thank my colleague from Senator Udall for yielding to me. Mr. President, I would yield the floor at this point.
Senator?
Senator from Oregon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Harkin, I'd certainly like to thank you for the many, many years that you have pursued reforming the rules of the Senate, initially from the perspective of being in the minority, and then maintaining that same effort in the majority. And I think it's important to recognize that the issues that we're presenting and bringing forth are to make the Senate work better as a deliberative body for both the minority and the majority. Now, if we were turning the clock back several decades, we wouldn't be here right now carrying on this colloquy. Instead, there would have been unanimous consent to put a rule proposal on the floor of the Senate, and we would be debating that proposal. That's the way the Senate worked for most of its first 2 centuries. In 1953, Senator Anderson put forward a resolution to adopt new rules at the start of Congress. There was a debate on it, and then eventually it was tabled by 51. Well, that's what the rules said. 51 could table it. They could set it aside. He did not win his debate, but he got it onto the floor of the Senate, and it was debated. The same thing in 1957. In 1959, he again did this. In 1961, he did this again. And in that case, it was debated on the floor of the Senate. Again, everyone said, let's get the rule out there, let's hold the debate. Eventually, they referred it to the Rules Committee. Finally, near the end of the cycle, it was moved out of the Rules Committee, back to the floor. They held another debate on Senator Anderson's proposal. And that debate then resulted in it was tabled. The resolution was tabled. So it didn't pass. To have the debate isn't to guarantee you're going to win the debate, but it is to engage in the deliberation, the exchange of ideas that enable us to capture the challenges we see, the challenges with our country, and in this case, the challenges with making the Senate function, and make things work better. And this goes on in 1963. So here we had 5 times in the course of 12 years, a rule proposal was put on the floor, it was debated, it was defeated, but it was put on the floor under the framework that 51 members could adopt rules under the Constitution, the constitutional power that you've been speaking to so eloquently for Congress to organize themselves, for the U.S. House of Representatives to organize themselves, and for the U.S. Senate to organize itself. So I wanted to go over a little bit of that history to say the very fact that we are not at this moment debating a rule proposal is a reflection of the dysfunction of the Senate. So the debate on the rules to fix the Senate itself reflects the dysfunction of the Senate. So I want to thank you for having engaged in so many years of efforts to bring these issues forward. And the challenge of fixing the Senate, it's been engaged by so many names that I was familiar growing up with, folks like Senator McGovern and Senator Mondale and Senator Church and Senator Pearson. And they all brought their effort to make this body work better, and we did have a major reform in 1975. But as a chart I put up earlier showed, the congestion and the paralysis from the abuse of the privilege of hearing yourself heard, making yourself heard before your colleagues, has now compromised the ability for us to fulfill our constitutional responsibilities, and we need to fight hard to try to fix the broken U.S. Senate.
Mr. President, would the Senator yield for a question on that point?
I'd be delighted to do so.
The Senator is a student of the Constitution. We've all looked at it. We know what it says. and I mentioned earlier about the fact that when we come in here, we take an oath of office to uphold and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to bear true faith and allegiance to the same. That's our oath of office, to bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution. Is it the Senator's view that perhaps the way the Senate is constructed right now may in some way, I just throw this out, may in some way take away my constitutional right to adequately represent my constituents? I mean, if it takes a supermajority, or if we can't even change the rules, as the senators pointed out, does this not take away some of the constitutional rights and obligations of a United States Senator? I asked my friend.
Well, certainly I'll tell you that Senator Byrd, who stood on this floor and said the Senate cannot be bound by the dead hand of the past, you can imagine that any particularly bizarre rule that might have been passed by our predecessors that damaged our ability to fill our constitutional responsibilities would be inappropriate, and we would need to change it. And the Constitution empowers us to change it with a simple majority. And so when the point comes that the Senate is not functioning in the fashion that it was constitutionally intended to function in, that is, a simple majority to pass legislation, then we certainly have to wrestle with whether we're doing our responsibility if we don't fight to make the Senate work better. We have an obligation to this chamber, and we have an obligation to our responsibilities under the Constitution.
I thank the Senator for his response on that.
Senator Merkley, Madam President, Mr. President.
Senator from New Mexico.
And I know, Mr. President, the presiding officer, he has also been a part of this rules reform effort, and we very, very much appreciate that. It was mentioned here about Senator Byrd, and I think one of the most interesting stories about Senator Byrd, Senator Harkin and Senator Merkley, in 1979 when he came to the floor, he was talking about, and we've used this quote many times, the dead hand of the past, not be ruled by the dead hand of the past. And what was he really talking about? He was talking about the idea that one Senate could establish in a set of rules and bind future Senates. And he gave a passionate speech, and we're in the situation that he talked about right now. He said, now we are at the beginning of Congress. This Congress is not obliged to be bound by the dead hand of the past. Take Rule 32, which is it's a different numbered rule today. But, for example, the second paragraph thereof, which says that the rules of this Senate shall continue from Congress to Congress until changed in accordance with these rules. That rule was written in 1959 by the 86th Congress. The 96th Congress is not bound by the dead hand of the 86th Congress. The first Senate, and now he talks a little bit about history here, which is very important. The first Senate, which met in 1789, approved 19 rules by a majority vote. First Senate. Those rules have been changed from time to time, and that portion of the Senate Rule 32 that I just quoted was instituted in 1959. So the members of the Senate who met in 1789 and approved that first body of rules did not for one moment think or believe or pretend that all succeeding Senates would be bound by that Senate. The Senate of the 86th Congress could not pretend to believe that all future Senates would be bound by the rules that it had written. It would be just as reasonable to say that one Congress can pass a law providing that all future laws have to be passed by two-thirds vote. Any member of this body knows that the next Congress would not heed that law and would proceed to change it and would vote to repeal it by a majority vote. Just no doubt about it. So he says, I'm not going to argue the case any further today except to say that it is my belief, which has been supported by rulings of 3 vice presidents of both parties and by votes of the Senate, in essence upholding the power and the right of a majority of the Senate to change the rules of the Senate at the beginning of a new Congress. And that's really the essence of where we are right today, is that we are able, if we have a majority, to move forward with adopting our rules that are going to function for this session of Congress. And that's why we're in such a battle here to try to get those proposals onto the floor. We want to get Senate Resolution 10. We want to get the talking filibuster proposal. We want to get those put onto the floor so we can have debate, we can have vote. And our understanding is that there's going to be objection from the other side. And as Senator Harkin said earlier, we function here by unanimous consent. And they apparently are not going to give us that consent. I know that Senator Harkin, changing the subject just a little bit here, but both Senator Harkin and Merkley mentioned earlier the whole issue of why we want the Senate to function better, that we have pressing national problems and challenges. And I think one of the senators that said it best made a comment back in 1971. This is Senator Hart, Senator Phil Hart of Michigan, and it still really resonates decades later. And I quote, "The apparent inability of the Senate to take action on our domestic ills when the needs are so painfully clear is a basic cause of unrest and disaffection among the citizenry. The imperative of change is obligatory if institutions like the Senate are to have the capacity to respond well to the complex array of overlapping domestic and international issues." Long ago, Thomas Jefferson said, "As new discoveries are made and new truths discovered, and manner and opinions change with the change of circumstances, institutions must advance also and keep pace with the time." Institutions must advance also and keep pace with the times. Senator Merkley, that's why we're here. We have rules that were adopted long ago that aren't working today. And you and I have talked several times about how you wouldn't, if you want your government to spend money wisely, you want it to be efficient, why do we not give them a budget until halfway through the fiscal year? Makes absolutely no sense. I mean, that's the situation we're in right now. We hold hearings, we bring the agency in, we think we're going to have an appropriations bill on the floor, and by the way, this year we didn't have last year we didn't have a single appropriations bill on the floor, so they think they're going to get one budget. Then when we pass the fiscal year, last October the 1st, we start the fiscal year, we start into it. We've done a couple of continuing resolutions, and a continuing resolution just gives them month-by-month funding. And now the next continuing resolution doesn't expire till March. And so who would tell any agency, nonprofit, government agency, that we're going to give you a budget, but we're not quite going to tell you what it is, and maybe go month to month, and then about halfway through the year, we're going to give you the rest of the budget. That's just not the way to take care of the people's money. It's not the way to be efficient. It's not the way to make sure that the people's money is very well spent. So I think it's important that we do that work, the work of appropriations bills, and as the senators that are on the floor right now, Senator Harkin is an appropriator. When you bring an appropriations bill to the floor and you have all 100 senators, take a look at the appropriations bill. Take a look at what's working in that department and what isn't, and how we move down the road with that particular set of policy initiatives and programs. That is something that the agency pays tremendous attention to, those amendments that are put in, the arguments that are made. And we're neglecting all of that now. Last year didn't do a single appropriations bill. And my understanding, the House, and I know we were very frustrated when I was over in the House, we'd say, well, why are we even passing the appropriations bills? The Senate doesn't do them. And we're just going to end up at the end of the year doing one of these continuing resolutions or an omnibus bill. For the first time in I don't know how long, last year the House gave up doing appropriations bills. So here, one of our core functions as a legislative body, what we all call the power of the purse, tremendously important. That power of the purse has been emasculated. It's been warped beyond recognition to the point where I think we're dysfunctional, the agencies are dysfunctional, and we've got to get it all back. Look at, and I know our chairman of the Judiciary Committee has outlined a number of times, and I find it appalling that we do not have the judicial people in place to do the job for the country. And, you know, right now the federal courts are looking at fraud on Wall Street. They're looking at all sorts of major cases that have to do with financial reform and insider trading and all of those kinds of things. Well, guess what? If you don't have judges to hear those cases, then all of that justice is going to be delayed. There's an old saying in the law, justice delayed is justice denied. And today, we have 94 judicial vacancies, and the Judicial Conference of the United States has weighed in with the United States Senate, the United States House, and said, these are judicial emergencies. 94 vacancies, 44 of them they consider emergencies. They need somebody in there immediately. And yet still, because of this constant filibuster we're in, it's a filibuster without real debate, but it wastes a lot of time. It prevents our ability to put those judicial nominations on the floor and to get an up or down vote. The same thing's true, I think, of the executive branch. Senator Merkley, I know you saw the article in the Washington Post, which was at the end of the first year of the Obama presidency. He only had 55% of his team in place, of the top people in the agencies to run the government. And it isn't all our fault. I mean, I think they were slow in sending some things up. But it's a pretty appalling number when you think to yourself, the job of a president is to put his people in place in the agency so his policies can be carried out. And what has happened is that has been delayed and slowed down. And I hearken back when I was a youngster here in Washington growing up. I was about 12 years old when my father became Secretary of the Interior. And here you have only half the people in place in the federal government. Well, my dad is Secretary of Interior. I remember him telling me when I would travel home, he said, Tom, I had my whole team in place, virtually whole team in place in 2 weeks. So he had his top people. He was ready to carry out policy, ready to move forward with the President's policies at the Department of Interior. And I remember we had holes. We had a variety of things going in the Department of Interior. We had a very talented woman from New Mexico who was going to become the solicitor. She moved her family, young family, her husband. They came to Washington. They had 3-month hold put on. Nobody could ever figure out why. But she was finally allowed to become the solicitor at the Interior Department. So all of these kinds of things, from holes to the constant filibuster without any real debate, have slowed down the government in a significant way and really prevented us from doing the important oversight job that we need to do. Senator Merkley, I know that you have other comments that you might like to make, and so I yield to you at this point.
Oh, thank you, Senator Udall. And it is quite a contrast that you're drawing between an era in which, in a 2-week period, the bulk of the team was in place, ready to do the work that they were elected by the U.S. people to do. The executive branch, headed by the President, had his secretaries, and the secretaries had their teams in place, and they were ready to go forward and to make sure that they were working hard on the agenda that they had laid out during the election cycle. As my colleague from Ohio said, Senator Harkin, Elections have consequences. That is the vision of our republic. That is a vision in which we elect a president, and the president says, here's my agenda, and then he puts together a team to get it done. And it is not in the spirit of our Constitution. It is certainly not in the spirit of our democratic souls to take, and after the people have elected a president, try to damage and inflict pain and obstruction upon that president. That's essentially saying that you do not accept the judgment of the United States citizens about electing the President of the United States. Well, this process has to change. We have to find a way that folks can come to this floor. It isn't that this chamber will approve every single nomination. It's that it will hold a debate and have a vote. And if there is no controversy surrounding someone, then that will probably be reduced to unanimous consent, and someone will be waved through to not take up the time on the floor of this chamber. There's more than 1,000 executive branch positions that have to be confirmed under statutes. That, too, should be changed. There's far too many positions that are basically set up so that they come to this chamber. And so that is certainly a subject of conversation. But for those that are under the law, need to come for our advice and consent, then we need to exercise that responsibility in a manner that is consistent with advice and consent, but not with attempting to damage the President of the United States and his team. Now, I was looking at a speech here by one of my colleagues from Tennessee, Lamar Alexander, and he notes that he titles it "The Filibuster, Democracy's Finest Show, the Right to Talk Your Head Off." That quote that he put at the top of his paper when he gave a speech before the Heritage Foundation is taken directly, I'll just hold up the picture here, that quote is taken directly from the film Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. In other words, the premise that my colleague put in his paper is that there needs to be the right of the people elected by the citizens to have their voices heard on the floor of the U.S. Senate. That's what the talking filibuster is about. It is about the people of the United States being able to see their senators when they're saying there needs to be additional debate to actually debate. So I want to note that there is a tremendous amount of bipartisan support for this notion that senators should not hide from the American people, that they should not be engaging in secret holds, but instead, if they're going to place a hold on a piece of legislation, to do it publicly and have accountability. There's tremendous support for the notion that when we proceed to vote that we want additional debate, that we're actually going to debate, so that we utilize the time of the Senate to weigh the pros and cons, to hear all of our colleagues. Not that folks say we want additional debate and go off to dinner, not that senators say we want additional debate and they go off on vacation. If they ask for additional debate, then we should have additional debate on the floor, laying out the pros and cons, arguing the merits, considering amendments, in short, the talking filibuster. So I have a unanimous consent request that I gave notice of half an hour ago. We are standing by right now, waiting for one of our colleagues from the other side to come, extending a courtesy to come and object to this unanimous consent request. So I'm saying this out loud and looking across the aisle and saying, we've been waiting half an hour. I think it's time for one of our colleagues who wishes to object to get here on the floor and, just as we've been talking about, make their case visibly in front of the citizens of the United States of America why they wish to object to having a full debate on the talking filibuster. I know my colleague is waiting to offer a unanimous consent amendment to have resolution number 10 and have it considered before this chamber. And so I think we've pretty well laid out the reasons why we think this debate is important. But we can't get to that debate without putting forward unanimous consent and having it concurred in or to be blocked in that by an objection. So see if my colleague from New Mexico wishes to make any more comments. And if not, I'll present my unanimous consent resolution, and we'll await our colleagues to come and either endorse it or object.
Mr. President.
The senator from New Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I am also waiting. I think, Senator Merkley, you're waiting to put in your, asking unanimous consent to put in your talking filibuster proposal, which is one that goes to the heart of the problem we have today. One of the things that I've learned the last 2 years in the Senate is that when 41 senators vote for more debate, that's basically what is happening, is when senators vote for debate, more debate, 41 of them, then we don't get more debate. A lot of times we're in quorum calls. A lot of times if we have a live quorum, we pull 51 senators over to the floor to try to get through that. There are a series of dilatory motions, and it's very, very difficult in a modern Senate to keep 51 senators here surrounding the floor. In the old days, they used to pull out cots and stay through the night so that senators would be able to sleep someplace to keep that live quorum going. But in a modern Senate, with everything going on, it's a tremendously unfair advantage for one side to have one senator and the other side have to have 51 in order to try to conduct any business. And that's the situation we're in today. And that's what the talking filibuster goes to. It goes to deal with that situation. And how does it deal with it? Well, if 41 senators request more debate, if they say to the other 59 senators, we want more debate, we very simply say, just as Senator Alexander said, and he was, I think, quoting Jimmy Stewart in The Right to Talk Your Head Off from Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, well, then come down and debate. We're going to have a debate period where nothing else is brought up but debate. And the job of the chair, as our presiding officer knows, will be in that period to ask the question, are any other senators on the floor that wish to debate? And at that particular point, the American people can look down and be able to make an observation. Well, is this debate that's educating the public? Is it moving things forward? Or is it just a filibuster to waste time? I would note there's a very interesting waste-time filibuster. One of the old-time senators out of California made the comment about that filibuster wasting time, and he was asked, this is former Senate Republican whip Thomas Kuchel of California, and he asked the question here on the floor of the Senate, says, what is a filibuster? My definition would be that, this is Senator Kuchel's definition, my definition would be that it is irrelevant speech-making in the Senate designed solely and simply to consume time and thus to prevent a vote from being taken on pending legislation. You know, he's pretty condemning of that kind of filibuster. But that's a judgment. We don't want to take people's right to debate away. We just want to make sure there is an honest, fair debate here on the floor. And that's, Senator Merkley, what I would compliment you on is that you have drafted a proposal, worked long and hard on it, and what it ends up doing is at the end of the debate, when the 41 senators call for debate, you go into that period of extended debate, they talk and they talk. At some point, when the chair asks, are any other senators on the floor that wish to debate, and there's silence, then you roll over into what's called post-cloture in 30 hours. Senator Merkley?
Well, so I might explain that if there is something critical to my state of Oregon, that the talking filibuster enables me to find a couple other senators who share my views. Perhaps they have similar issues in their state. For example, the citizens of Oregon don't want oil companies drilling off our coast. We have a tremendous business in salmon, in ground fish, rockfish. We have a river economy. It depends on the migration of those salmon upstream. We have a crab industry. We have a tourist industry, most spectacular coastline to be found anywhere in the world, the coast of Oregon. The last thing we want is an accident that puts oil all over our beaches and destroys multiple aspects of our economy. So if there was a bill here on the floor that said we're going to drill for oil off the coast of Oregon, and if I felt that that was a mistake, a huge mistake, then I could organize with other senators and be here day and night to block that misguided legislation. And in that sense, we're not changing the number. It still takes 60 members to close debate. We protect the voice of the minority. We say that 2 members could continue a debate day and night. Now, for that matter, 1 could, but eventually one's going to collapse on the floor like Jimmy Stewart did. But I think this is important to note, because the talking filibuster is about taking away frivolous obstructions that paralyze the Senate and prevent it from doing its responsibilities on advise and consent and considering regular bills from the House, and certainly to be able to get the appropriation bill done, the authorization bills done, and so on and so forth. And so there may be those out there who say, well, we oppose the talking filibuster because it takes away the power of the minority to block legislation. Actually, the talking filibuster doesn't do anything of the kind. It just says that when you block legislation, you have to do it in front of the American people. You have to stand here on the floor, and you have to make your case.
Senator Merkley, Mr. President,